Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Shaft podcast. Today, we want to do a match breakdown of the game between Newcastle and then Chelsea. This game happened at the St. James Park and ended with a scoreline of 2-0 in favor of Newcastle. We're going to be looking at the game, the starting lineups, what the implication of the game itself was, what happened within the game. I'm going to give you my thoughts and then analysis, and then the implications for the Champions League places moving forward. First of all, I think for Newcastle, given their many injuries, we saw that they were able to go back to their usual shape with the lineup that they had, given some of the injuries to Joe Willock and co. But especially for Chelsea, we saw the consistency in the lineup, which we were looking for some time now. Once again, with Caicedo inverting at right back, and then we having Lavia in the middle of the pitch. I think that there are a couple of things to look at over here, because some people spoke about the fact that players like Reece James were missing within the squad. I think this is something that I touched on when I spoke about Maresca in general, but would look at what this means moving forward, whether this is a system that we want to continue using moving forward, and whether it was still good for us. I think in terms of the game itself, it's a very, very difficult game to analyze, especially from a Chelsea perspective. I think we considered a goal very, very early in the second minute through Sandro Tonali's goal, who capitalized on an error by picking the ball off Romeo Lavia, and once again finding the space where Caicedo was not occupying, and then being able to score. Just the first thing with that goal is people calling out the defensive lapse, especially from Caicedo, which is very easy to call out because people do question why Caicedo is starting at right back instead of a natural right back like Reece James. So I just wanted to quickly touch on that. First off, I don't think that this was a bad lineup, given that it has been our strongest lineup throughout the season. Some of the best games that we've played within the season has featured Caicedo at right back, who is inverting into midfield. And just like I said the other time also, considering that the right back in this Chelsea setup would be spending most of their time in midfield, it makes more sense to play a midfielder in this position rather than a right back. I mean, Reece James is excellent within midfield, but I think we've seen that a lot of times in very, very difficult games, you might need someone who is way more technical. And not that Reece James in himself is not technical. However, you do know that his best output is within right back and not necessarily within the midfield. I think when Thomas Tuchel was asked about this during Reece James' national team game, he did emphasize that yes, Reece James had the abilities to play in there. However, for a very, very technical game, a very, very demanding game, he finds it very, very hard to see him there. And this is something that I agree with on a scale, also because not that Reece James is not good within this role, but generally within this team, I think that he has required some time to be able to learn and understand that role and play it to the level at which we are. But secondly, like Caicedo in that role, I wouldn't want anyone else to be there, if I'm being honest. On Reece James though, I do think that Maresca needs to find a way to put him into the starting lineup. At the start of the season, we saw him as one of the right-sided centre-backs, which means that when Caicedo inverts, we found him at the right side, being able to drive up with the ball and still being able to put in crosses like we used to. And that's where I still see that he may be able to play a very big role for us. But I do hope to see what the evolution of Maresca's tactics will be within the second season. I'm keen to see what he does with our fullbacks, given that I think we have a lot of talent, especially on the right side of the game. But in terms of this game specifically, I don't think that there was any error with the lineup. And I saw people calling that, well, it wasn't working, so why didn't you change it? I don't think it is a good idea for any change to any coach to change their lineup after 15 minutes, then what's the point? Because you are definitely going to struggle, and it's about trying to find the solutions, and you only consider changing it when it's quite clear that something else is going to give you more advantage. However, it's always beneficial to stick with what you know and try and do it much, much better. I think it was the most sensible thing to do. And I'm going to talk about the red card by Nico Jackson, and I have a lot of thoughts at this point, mostly because of the reactions that I've been seeing online after the red card, with unfortunately lots of abuse targeted at Jackson. I don't want to go into that detail, but I just have some different opinions in there. However, I think even after the goal, we tried to play the game. However, it was clear that Newcastle was just going to drop in, play their 5-4-1, and they looked very, very comfortable in possession. What I found out was that once Newcastle had descended into that shape, it was very, very difficult to break them down. But not only that, they became way more dangerous on the counter-attacks, which meant that if we took too much risk, we were likely to concede again. And that brings me to another key point which I wanted to make, because once again, even the commentators within the game kept on mentioning that, well, we needed to catch Newcastle on the break, and we needed to exploit the spaces that they leave anytime they come out to defend. However, I don't think that I think if this was possible, the players would have done it, right? I think if this was possible, it would have been done. It was quite clear that you cannot engage with Newcastle in a high-intensity basketball match, especially in those weather conditions, and especially in that stadium where the fans were ready to jump out and support their team and give their team that energy. It was very important that we take the energy out of the crowd, and the only way to do that is through patient, consistent build-up, making sure you keep the ball, you starve them of possession, and give the fans nothing to cheer about. And we saw this in the second half, but I'll come to it later. But the entire thinking that somehow we needed to be hitting Newcastle on the break is ridiculous to me, especially under those conditions. I think that the boys had the right approach to the game. Sure, the first few minutes was very bad, but who didn't know this? This is St. James Park. This is Newcastle's home. This is a team that sits in third. It was always going to be difficult. And I think that even as of the time we went down, we all knew that it was a matter of time we were going to get our opportunities and chances, and we could still see that we were trying so many different things. Now to the red card situation. Well, what happened is that Jackson takes a look at Sven Botsman and then leads with his elbow into the player, catching the player within the face. The first reaction of the referee is to show Jackson a yellow card. However, an on-screen review was recommended by VAR, leading to the referee to take a look at the footages again and change his decision and give him a red card. I have said this constantly about the VAR, that it seems to be making the decisions for these referees. Now to the foul itself. I do agree, and I first of all want to call out Jackson over here. I do agree that if you give the referee an opportunity to make this decision, then you do not almost have any right to be able to complain as to how that decision goes. And I think that it was wrong of him, and it was clearly immature in the way in which he led with his elbow. You just don't do that on a football pitch. Apart from you disappointing your teammates, it endangers the opponent, and that's something that we should not encourage at any point in time. However, with that being said, I think the referee's initial reaction or initial yellow card was deserving, was well fit, because if you look at the footage and if you look at the incident, you would realize that even though Jackson did have a look at the player, there was an expectation to lean into the body of the player and not necessarily to strike him in the face. So it did look like it was a matter of pure coincidence that Sven Botman didn't jump or that the contact was made. And there was no clear intention to harm the opponent. So for this to be marked as violent conduct and for Jackson to be given a red card and to be banned for 3 games, I think it's a bit harsh. Do not get me wrong. I am not saying that this red card was not deserved or that the ref was evil, but we're going to come into the details of the ref. But I think that it was a very harsh decision, especially in context of what this game itself was supposed to mean. This was a game which was deciding which team makes it out into the Champions League, and playing it in this manner necessarily is not the way to go. Also because and I've seen this happen a lot within St. James Park, and Maresca did mention it, because the referee seem to be giving a lot of these calls to the Newcastle players, which I thought was, well, we've seen it happen a number of times. So and he did mention that the crowd looked to be calling for most of those decisions, which I think I have to agree with him over here. But I've seen it happen a number of times. As in James Park, it does seem that fouls tend to get punished a bit more. Newcastle themselves have been lucky with a couple of penalties in their last run to this Champions League. It sounds a bit salty, but yeah, I think this is what I have observed, especially in relation to this, and I have to agree with Maresca when he calls this out. So we have the red card, but luckily we are able to make it out of the half with just a 1-goal deficit. Now, we come out in the second half and we look much, much better. Even with 10 men, it did look like we now had an idea of how to play the game. And just like I said just a couple of minutes ago, it did look like our patience build up, looking to draw Newcastle in and draw them out of spaces. And with Cole Palmer's intelligent movement, we started to find a lot of spaces, especially down the left wing of the park where Cucurella was. And he did a fantastic job. I think that he probably was our best player today. He dominated that left flank and made sure that we continue to generate attacks and we continue to pressure the Newcastle box. I think it was quite unfortunate. It was quite clear that the lack of the 11th man was really hurting us in terms of us not being able to find a man in the box when we've generated the chances which are catching them on the back foot. And it was clear that we were the better team. For me, there's not a lot that you can take from that, especially given that we lost the game. But that second half should give Chelsea fans a lot of encouragement in terms of how we want to play. It does look like if indeed we do turn up, we are literally one of the teams that are unplayable within the league. But that being said, Reece James also, in terms of the tactical tweaks, we saw Reece James come onto the pitch in the right back position, and we saw Caicedo move back into the midfield. I think it was a good decision to take Madueke off. I like Madueke a lot, but just one thing I wanted to point out with him in this game was that it's important that they learn how to play some of these matches. In some games, the way in which you take risk should be quite measured, and it did look like he was still taking a lot of risk. Sometimes even when we're down to 10 men, causing him to lose the ball and not also giving him the ability to be able to track back and to be able to reclaim possession when this was lost. And this continues to put the team under a lot of pressure. I think Enzo moving to that right side with Caicedo really, really helped to provide that level of stability, ball retention, which enabled us to recycle possession over and over again. But I think we looked much, much better with Reece James on the pitch, with some tactical tweaks which allowed him to generate the chance close to the end of the game where he almost headed the ball in. Now, to Reece James himself, whilst I'm on that topic, I do think that, especially from next season, Maresca needs to find a way to put him on the pitch. I think, like I've already mentioned, I see him maybe back in the centre-back position, but even within the midfield, he's still very, very effective. And I don't know what would happen with the wing-back situation However, we need to find a way to have him on the field. He has too much quality to be rotting away on the bench. Now, Chelsea being able to generate some of these chances, it did look like we lacked a bit of that firepower moving forward. And eventually, Newcastle was still going to get their chances, right? So Bruno Guimaraes has the ball. And after the tango with Enzo Fernandez, it's quite painful to see Bruno score and then do that celebration. I was Argentinian on this one. I'm sorry. But Bruno gets the ball outside of the box. He makes an attempt to shoot with nobody closing him down. Who can blame some of these players, especially because they are super tight close to the end of the game. But I do think that Gusto should have closed him down much earlier. But there seems to be some confusion as to who exactly was picking him up. And there was a very wicked deflection leading to Sanchez being caught off guard and the ball going in. Even after that, you still saw that the team was positively reacting, trying to get the odd goal. And I think that came from the understanding that goal difference was also playing a role. And I think this is also one of the things that the team is going to learn from. Just to summarize a few thoughts in general, I think that players like Jackson, they need to learn and understand the impact of their decisions, especially within these kind of games and throughout the season. I don't think it's good enough. I think at this point he has racked up more cards than he has goals, and especially given the kind of season that he had in the first season where he scored a decent amount of goals, I expected a lot of progression. I expected more character development from him. But he is an emotional player. He is an emotional striker. And I think that he needs to be able to learn from some of these things. I think if he's a bit more disciplined, if he stays a bit more calm, he's going to be a lethal and deadly striker for us. I do not have doubts over his ability. I think that sometimes the learning curve is not linear, right? So this season he still had to learn a lot, and I hope that more time under this coach would give him the ability to do so. But I still think that we need to sign a striker. I mean, I'm not within that school of thought that thinks that we need to sign like a world-class striker who is coming to bang in all of the goals and fix our problems. I personally think that's super naive, especially looking at the markets now, especially looking at the way in which teams are being built. Super naive to think that having a striker who can score 20, like the striker who is scoring 37 goals or whatever in Lisbon or wherever, still needs to come into this team, still needs to work hard, and still needs to be able to translate that ability over here. And we've seen a lot that these players indeed do have the ability. But I'm quite keen for us to have the right striker who fits the profile of the coach, and not just any striker who can score goals. Because if he doesn't fit the profile of the team, if he doesn't fit what we're trying to do, he'll be very, very useless within the setup. Let me know if you would like me to make a video to talk about some of the striker options which we are looking at, because I have some very, very, very strong opinions about the kind of strikers that we're still being linked to. However, I still think that we need someone very, very competent who knows how to play the system, who would give a lot of competition to Jackson, but then also be able to take some of the load off him. In terms of what this means for the Champions League run-up, as of now, I've already seen the results between Nottingham Forest and Leicester City. And this helps because what this means is that even if Nottingham Forest wins against us, most likely their biggest beneficiaries might be Villa. But this also means that for Chelsea, these 6 points are non-negotiable. So looking forward to the match against Manchester United, where I know they have qualified for the cup final, so hopefully they will be able to field a week 11. Means that we can't take advantage of that, and we can't go to Nottingham Forest. Given how they've been playing anyway, we should not allow them to take those 3 points, which I think will be good. Newcastle puts themselves in a very, very good position. However, they do have very, very difficult fixtures I think, against Arsenal and Everton, who clearly are a bogey team. So we're still in a good position to be able to qualify for the top 5 and make Champions League. I think that Chelsea should make Champions League, just on the basis that they've been consistent performers at that level throughout the season. People seem to forget that Newcastle had a very, very long and dry spell, and today they are there. Nottingham Forest was flying all throughout. They're having a bad spell. Chelsea also had a bad spell. Man City has had a bad spell. So I don't think just on the basis of us having a bad spell means that we do not deserve Champions League. All of these clubs which are there have had similar kinds of situations. So I think we've been consistent enough, and we've been good enough to be in the top 5 at least within this season. I think that is absolutely true, and I do hope that we make it all throughout. All right, so that is my analysis for the game. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I do hope to hear some of your reactions to some of my thoughts and comments. I'm very, very keen to hear your thoughts, especially on the referee situation. I'm also keen to hear your thoughts on Enzo Maresca's lineup. I like to talk a lot about some of the tactics and some of the things that he's doing. I'm one of those who really, really sees what he does. So feel free to ask me any questions or what you want me to, or what you think about some of these things. I would also encourage all of you to continue to please like, subscribe, and put in your comments. We'd really, really love to hear from you. Up the Chelsea from the Shaft Podcast. See you all.